What scares you? I mean, what causes those shivers of adrenaline to course through your body? What scares you? Maybe it's something small. Maybe it's that spider that's crawling around, here somewhere in Celebration Hall, waiting to sneak up and get you. It could be the snake that our youth leader, Jared, released in youth group that we've not been able to find yet. So, it could be something far more serious. What scares you? Is parents, you ever had that moment when you've watched your child who doesn't quite understand what's going on, running as fast as they can toward traffic? And that moment that your heart stops, your breathing stops, and the world just seems to stop as you scream for your child to stop. Maybe it's that phone call, 2:30 in the morning. Nothing good happens at 2:30 in the morning. Remember those times that I've gotten calls from my boys as they were growing up, and they would start, "Dad, there's been an accident." And, just that terror goes through. I've taught them, don't ever do that to me. If you call me at 2:30 in the morning and there's been an accident, don't start out saying there's been an accident. I don't want that terror. If you call me at 2:30 in the morning, wake me up by saying, "Dad, I'm good. Everything's okay here. I'm healthy." Then you can tell me there's an accident. Break it to me gently. Don't startle me. What scares you? Most of the things that cause us the greatest fear are when we're about to lose something. We're about to lose someone we love. We're about to lose our health. We're losing our security. Those things that cause us to face loss are what scares us the most. In the story from the Gospel of Matthew, the story of Joseph was scared. He was terrified. We know he was terrified because the first thing the angel said to him in the dream is, "Don't be afraid." He was scared. See, Joseph was about to lose something very, very precious to him. Joseph was about to lose his wife. Now, we have a whole lot of confusion about the relationship between Mary and Joseph at this point. But what you need to understand is at the point this story occurs, she was his wife. He was her husband. See, in our culture, we've got our own way of getting married. Jesus' day, it was drastically different. In Jesus' day, all marriage were arranged by the parents. Your parents decided who you were going to spend your life with. And there were a lot of negotiations that went on in that, a lot of financial considerations in that. And finally, there would come a time that the parents would sit down with you and your spouse-to-be, maybe the first time you had met, and actually sign a document of marriage. At that point, when that document was signed, you were husband and wife. Only separated by divorce, you were husband and wife. But in that culture, you wouldn't live with your spouse for maybe a year. Now, we've got that really reversed in our culture today. We just got it flipped around. But in that culture, there was the marriage, and then there was this year-long betrothal where there were lots of things to do, but they didn't share the house because the house wasn't ready yet. You see, in the betrothal, everybody had responsibilities. The husband, as part of the contract, had to pay a bride price. They had to bribe mom and dad to let go of the girl. And so he had to earn it. Sometimes they did it by service, but they had to spend that time earning the money to pay the price for the bride. Now, that's really not all that hard for us to get to. Because have you ever heard somebody say, "Well, I'll ask her to marry me when I save up money for the ring"? Some people have been saving for years and never quite get around to it. But, they're saving for it. So this was a year of getting the money, getting the service done to pay the bride price. It was also the time that the groom was responsible for getting the house ready, building the house for him and his new bride to move into. Now, there usually wasn't a brand new house. Usually they would build another room on the side of his mom and dad's house that would be their home. But he was responsible for getting that done. And it always had to be, and I love the way the rabbis did this. The rabbis had decreed that when the bride left her mother and father's home and moved into her home with her husband, that it had to be a better house than the one that she had left. See, women always had to marry as an upgrade. And so, if you couldn't upgrade any other way, you had to at least know you're going to be living in a nicer place than you grew up in. That could be a challenge for some of the men. During this period of time, the wife had responsibilities as well. She had to prepare her wedding gown. Now, it had to be hand sewn, it had to be decorated, and it would include much of the family wealth sewn into it as part of the wedding gown. After that year of earning money, of building, of getting the dress ready and getting everything else ready, there would come a time at about a year's length of a wedding processional where the groom and his friends would go to the bride's house and get her and take her to his house, and a wedding feast that could last up to 7 days. At that point, then there would be the home. They would go home together and the marriage would be consummated. But that moment when the contract was signed, they were committed to each other. They were married to one another. They were husband and wife. And in this story, Joseph, a righteous man, is about to lose his wife. See, we don't know how the conversation went when he was told. But he knows that Mary, his wife, is pregnant. And he knows he didn't have anything to do with that pregnancy. And he is ready. He's not sure what he's ready to do. He's trying to consider his options. He's a good man. He's a righteous man. He doesn't want to cause any more harm. But when he looks at Mary and he knows that she's pregnant and she says it's this work of God, and he's not quite sure he can buy that. And he's trying to decide if he would divorce her. Now, he could. I mean, really, he could make a public spectacle of it and absolutely embarrass her, send her back to her parents' home, get any investment he would get back from the parents. And poor Mary, she would be marked as an immoral woman, and she would probably spend her life in shame. Joseph had the power to do that. But then he decided, well, maybe instead of doing that, maybe he should put her away quietly. Now, what that meant is that they would go ahead, the marriage would still be there, they'd be husband and wife. But Mary would probably go and live with her cousin Elizabeth, and there really wouldn't be any marriage. It would be a quiet separation. Or he could just go along with it. I mean, there would be some embarrassment. People would look at them and say, well, but Joseph could just bring her on home. But then he was a righteous man. And how can he, as a righteous man, submit himself to living with an unrighteous woman? How can he believe? Or he could believe her. He could believe that this baby was somehow a miracle of God. I mean, the prophets had talked about such things. Maybe this was. But then if Mary was telling the truth and this baby was a gift from God, can you imagine the terror of wondering whether or not Joseph himself was righteous enough for that responsibility? How can I, as a man, handle God's work? What becomes of me if I fail? See, everywhere he looked, every option he tried to consider led to loss. And he was terrified. But then, in this dream, God's messenger comes to him and says, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid, because Emmanuel, because God is with you. Do you hear that? When we face these moments of fear and terror in our lives, when it looks like all of our options are bad and we're not sure which way to turn, we have Emmanuel. We have God with us. Get a hold of that. We have this God who is so loving, so powerful, so smart, so wonderful, so gracious, that no matter what choice that we make, bad or good, God will never, ever give up on us. Don't be afraid. You can't ruin God's love for you. Wow. Think of it this way. I have a cousin named Jerry McCall. And if I wanted to send him a Christmas greeting, but he's not been well, and so I'd like to have that greeting delivered in person. Could maybe somebody take it to Jerry for me? And if somebody would agree, there are some people that think the will of God is like that request. I tell you his name and tell you that he's out there somewhere, but that's all. Go out and kind of muddle through it yourself. You ask enough people, you wander around long enough, you just might get lucky and find him by yourself. And some people think that's how God treats us. He just, I think, says, go out there, do it. You know, maybe you'll get lucky and end up in the right place. Who knows? It's up to you. Or I could say to you, would you deliver this to my cousin Jerry? He lives in Irvine, California. It is 2,089 miles from this building to his house. And I will tell you that there are 34 turns between here and his house in Irvine, California. Just 35 turns. And if you knock out the 10 turns that you already know between here and I-70 West by the airport, there are only 24 other turns between here and Jerry's house. And I will tell you where to make those turns. But that's all you get. See, some people think that following the will of God is that kind of legalism. So you've got the rules, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And you've got to follow these. And you make a mistake somewhere along the way, you're sunk. I mean, have you ever taken a vacation, made the wrong turn? Now, women, if that happens to you, you'll stop and ask directions. But before, GPSs and all that, we men would drive for 500 miles before we would stop and ask anybody for any help. And so that's how some people think the will of God is. It's this legalism. You've got to follow through. If you make a mistake, you make the wrong decision, you're sunk. What if I asked you to deliver it, but I gave you a programmed GPS? Had all the information that you would need. Take you right to his doorstep. And if along the way you made a mistake, it would go, recalculating. No matter how many mistakes you made, it would always have the goal there and would always know the way to get through. This is God's will. God's will doesn't change. If we make a wrong turn, it's like that GPS. God is up there. All right, recalculate. God doesn't look down at us and say, well, they blew that one out of here. He said, recalculating. I'm going to bring their will. I'm going to bring my will about. And they're like, recalculating. God is like this GPS that keeps us going. But there is one other option. What if I got in the car with you? See, I've been there. I know the way there. And if we travel and there's some mistakes that get made, I'm going to be with you so that I can say, no, we need to try this. Or if there's a detour, I can say we get around it this way. You see, that's Emmanuel. That's God's with us. As we struggle through life and we face all these decisions and we face all these options where sometimes none of them are any good, God is with us in the midst of it, guiding us through it, never deserting us. We don't have to be afraid of getting lost. Emmanuel, God with us. Was near the end of October this year. Superstorm Sandy. A man named Randy Haba was asleep in the Coast Guard station near Cape Hatteras in North Carolina when the alarm went off in the middle of the night. Word was that the HMS Bounty, a reconstruction of a 17th century, 18th century sailing ship, had tried to sail around the storm and had not made it. Being caught in the storm, was taking on water, was sinking. 17 people on board. Boat was going down. Randy was part of a Coast Guard crew that was called to the rescue. There was a C-130 that was overhead that was able to identify the beacon lights. And Randy was on one of 2 helicopters that were sent for the rescue. 30-foot waves that night, 60, 70 mile an hour winds. The waves were so big that when the helicopters got to where the people were, that the pilot actually had to have one of the crew members call out the amount of time between the waves, because he would raise the helicopter up at the wave and lower it back down so he could keep sight of the people. So the waves are going, he was taking the helicopter up and down with each one of the waves. When they got near, they found out that one of the sailors had fallen out of the life raft. It was what called a Gumby suit, this survival suit. On the survival suit, there was this beacon flashing that was activated by the water, so this bright light was flashing. But he had been lost in the darkness. Can you imagine that poor soul? Here he is in the middle of the ocean. It's pitch black out. It's a storm. Maybe some lightning every once in a while. And when the lightning came, all he could see was a 30-foot wave coming down. Up and down he would go. Pitch black. Talk about terror. There was no hope. Then the helicopter with Randy in it appeared. They saw the flashing light and were able to come and hover over, bouncing up and down, trying to stay above the waves. And Randy looked out and saw this person there in the water. What did he do? Can you imagine? What if he went over and he leaned over and looked down, got the loudspeaker off the helicopter and go, "Dummy!" I mean, he could have done that. I mean, how stupid can you be trying to sail around one of the biggest storms in history? Dummy! And just left him. You know, some people think God does that to us when we mess up. Dummy! Step! Not going to bother that person anymore. That's not what Randy did. Randy could have said, "Swim harder! Stroke one, kick two. Stroke one, kick two. Stroke one." He could have done that. And some people think that when we're in a mess, God just goes, "Try harder." What did Randy do? Randy put the hoist on. And he lowered himself down into this raging sea. And he hit this freezing water. And when he got in it, he disconnected his tether. And he was in the storm. See, this is Emmanuel, God with us. God not up yelling at us. God not up criticizing us. God in the storm, in the darkness, in the waves, in the terror with us. Emmanuel. Don't be afraid, Joseph. Emmanuel, God is with you. Don't be afraid, Mary. Emmanuel, God is with you. Don't be afraid. How do we know this? There's a story of a little girl. Now, 3, 4, 5, it doesn't matter that much. She did not like the dark. And every night when her mom and dad would put her to bed, they would say their prayers. They would leave the nightlight on. And as they got ready to leave the room, the little girl would ask the same thing every night. "Daddy, make some noise." See, what she wanted to know that when mom and dad left her alone in the dark room, that she could hear them in the next room. She could hear them rattling around the kitchen. She could hear them walking around the house. Because she knew as long as she kept hearing them, that she would be okay. The sacrament that we are about to share is God making noise in the darkness of life for us. God saying, "I'm here. I am with you. I am Emmanuel. Don't be afraid." Let us pray. We have fears in our life. There are so many things that we can lose. So many things that terrify us. But you, Lord, never abandon us. You join us in the struggle, grasping a hold of us, rescuing us from the surf and the waves. Help us, O Lord, to trust in you, Emmanuel, so that our fears might be overcome. Hear our prayer. We pray it in Christ's name. Amen. Let us prepare for the sacrament as we sing together.